This episode is brought to you by Greenlight. Get this. Adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Spotify. Greenlight.com/Spotify.
Hey Satby listeners, any true crime fans among you might want to check out Crime Capsule, the episode Northern Ohio Cold Cases, which features an interview with Jane Ann Terzillo. She talks about the importance of local knowledge in investigating these stories, including the case of Robert Hamrick and the wild speculation about his death, a cautionary tale about the power of misinformation and the importance of seeking the truth amidst the noise. Another case she discusses is the disappearance of Police Chief Mel Wiley. This too covers the intricate web of personal secrets, community dynamics, and often overlooked details that can change the narrative entirely. Jane's insights into these cases highlight how mysteries are rarely straightforward and often involve layers of human emotion and complexity.
Welcome back to Crime Capsule. I'm your host, Benjamin Morris. New York, it's a hell of a town. The Bronx is up and the battery's down. One of my favorite song lyrics, echoed only by the love letters penned to the city by Frank Sinatra, Billie Holiday, and of course, the Beastie Boys and Jay-Z. There is nothing like a trip to the greatest city in the world to get you curious about who lived and who died there, who set their ambitions on the skies, and who still remains to haunt the earth. Here at Crime Capsule, we make a point of visiting the Big Apple as often as possible for just that reason. And today, we are thrilled to visit a part of the city that most folks know more by name and by how you get there than by actual experience. And yet, the island is a part of the city that is central to its history, as today's author shows. Marianna Randazzo is the author of, yes, you guessed it, Haunted Staten Island, just published by the History Press. As we continue our journey through spooky season, she's here to take us to one of the most charged places in all of New York. Marianna, welcome to Crime Capsule.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure. We are so excited about this particular book. And let me just ask you right up front, this is your fifth book, your sixth book? I mean, you got a couple notches on the belt, don't you?
I do. I've had an interesting introduction to writing books, and I'm on my way to writing my next one, hopefully. So this is my sixth book. Yes.
Love it. And you said that this is, if I remember correctly, your first actual appearance with this title that has just been published. Is that right?
Yes. It was just published a couple of weeks ago.
Well, congratulations again. And again, you know, we are doubly excited because we have not had a good New York book on the show in a minute. And last year, oh, I know. It's been way too long. You know, we had a title called Haunted Brooklyn, and we had a great time with that. You know, wonderful conversation with the author of Haunted Brooklyn. But, you know, the Staten Island is so rich and so deep with all sorts of things going on.
True.
I'm so delighted to get to travel, you know, on the ferry across the Hudson. Now, I do have to ask you right up front, get this right out of the way. Sometimes I wonder, is Staten Island haunted more by Pete Davidson than anything else, you know, at this point? It seems like he's kind of put it on the map more than anybody.
Possibly, but we have a lot of other good people and good things to offer as well, and a lot of scary things, so get ready.
Yeah. I can't wait. So tell us a little bit about your background. You said that you came to writing from a slightly unusual place. So how did this all come about?
Okay, so the first 35 years of my career, I was a teacher. I was actually a reading specialist, and I always loved reading. And even as a kid, I was fascinated with the paranormal. I could remember reading Rosemary's Baby in the 8th grade and being terrified, and my mother coming into the room and saying, isn't that a scary book? And I said, no, it's not scary, because I never wanted her to know when I was reading, because that's how you learned about sex in those days. But
there you go.
But then I graduated to The Exorcist and the Amityville Horror, and I remember reading those on the bus going to Kingsborough College, and every day reading a chapter because it was like a diary. And then I met my husband, my late husband, when I was 18 years old, and he had a fascination with it as well. So from there, we started visiting places. We went to Salem, Massachusetts to see the witch trials reenactment. I actually stood at Lizzie Borden's house in Fall Rivers, Massachusetts, which was very, very interesting and scary. We've been to Key West. I stood at Robert the Doll's house it's called the Artist's House. They're trying to disguise the fact that Robert the Doll was there. And we just always found things to do. We actually went to Arizona and stood at the Copper Queen Hotel and next to Julia Lowell's room, which was the prostitute that hung herself. And she was not in favor of any lovers being in her hotel. So my husband and I actually experienced an apparition of her at the time. Yeah, that was interesting. I saw something and then I said to him, "Did you see that?" And he's like, "Yep, I did." And we went down and we wrote it in the hotel book of experiences. And they said, "Well, you know that you were sleeping in the room next to Julia Lowell, and she does not like happily married," or, well, that's not what they said, but apparently she doesn't like people in love.
Wow.
So that was interesting. And then 18 years ago, I retired from teaching and I had an opportunity. Well, I had to reinvent myself after about 35 years of teaching. And I started to, I had a business going on as a tutor, but I also started writing. And that's when I wrote my first book, Giving Away a Sicilian Upbringing. Those were the memoirs of my mother and her sister growing up in Sicily during World War II. So from there, people started asking me to write their memoirs, and I did a few of those. I wrote a story about Michael Behetti. He was a firefighter. And then I wrote the Father Capitano biography. And for Arcadia, I also wrote The Italians of Brooklyn. And then when I thought about it, what else do I know? What else do I love to write about? I thought about how I lived in Staten Island. And when I moved here, everybody started telling me, "Oh, that place is haunted. Oh, this is haunted." So the first thing I did was I got a part-time job at the Garibaldi Meucci Museum. And I worked there for 10 years. And I had some experiences there. Nothing really too heavy, but there were people that were there speaking to ghosts in the library. So that intrigued me as well. And then once I proposed the idea to Arcadia, they said, History Press, they said, "Okay, see what you got." And I put it out there. And of course, everybody had a story to tell me. But I said, "Look, I can't just go by, you were sitting there and you saw a ghost. I need things that are documented and, that people have looked into before." And it wasn't that hard to find. I mean, starting in the 1600s, places like the Conference House had documented ghostly apparitions, and they were usually connected to some kind of a crime, I found. So that I found interesting as well.
Yeah.
So usually where there's smoke, there's fire.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that is such an incredible journey. I love the fact that you went around searching these places out as kind of your foundation. And wow, the fact that you saw saw her and she was displeased with you is that's really something to kind of sit with. I'm glad you made it out of that, Marianna.
Yeah,
you know,
I did. My husband was very good at finding these places for us to explore. Lizzie Borden's house was a trip too. Yeah, we slept in the maid's bedroom up there, next to the toy room.
Like a was there a loose ceiling fixture that was threatening to come down on you at any minute or what? I mean,
no. In that house, there were toys in the attic, and people had reported hearing toys move around. They found them in different places. And that house was actually not haunted so much. You know the story, how she killed her mother and her stepmother and her father. And I think that house is haunted by the children that lived next door. They were Lizzie's cousin, and apparently the whole family had a history of mental illness. And these children were drowned in a well. So those toys belonged to them, and I think they haunt the house. And that night I couldn't sleep. I kept dreaming of babies crying. It was horrible. I said, we're never doing this again. But of course we did.
Of course you did. Yeah, you get the itch doesn't stay scratched for long, does it? So this book, I mean, one of the things I love about Haunted Staten Island is this book is so expansive. I mean, it has so many different types of cases and legends and stories, which are just a little bit more than folklore, because as you say, you know, you did a lot of documentation and you know, archive digging and that sort of thing. And what was interesting to me, one of the first things I wanted to ask you about your book is you actually make reference to a kind of history of research on strange things happening on Staten Island, right? And you even mention in the foreword sort of previous scholars, Hines and Davis, who had written a book, who'd kind of come along before you, and here you are picking up the thread. Can you just give us like a little insight into who has worked on this in Staten Island before, and what kind of contribution did they make?
Well, I will tell you about Patricia Salmon.
Okay.
Patricia is a historian, and she was the curator of Staten Island Museum. She has become a friend to me, and she actually inspired me to learn about Staten Island. She does all types of talks and lectures, and she did the foreword of my book. So it was through her I learned so much. I mean, you could go on YouTube and look her up with Snug Harbor, and she's just a wonderful woman and so intelligent and so knowledgeable. So she really was my inspiration. And then, of course, when I was doing the research, I dug up every book I could on anything to do with New York, especially Staten Island, folklore, ghost tales, paranormal. And I just learned, I studied the stories. I saw what was repeated. I saw the differences in the stories. Of course, we can't prove if the ghost was wearing red or white, but if they say there was a ghost, then we have to, it's hearsay, of course, but if enough things have happened to justify it, we could go with it. I mean, I don't believe in bad things, but, I do believe in the Holy Ghost, so why wouldn't there be other ghosts? I mean, that's how I was raised.
I think there's also something to be said for a collection of reports that seem to document similar things happening over time in the same place. It's kind of interesting when you have multiple independent attestations that, the people didn't know one another who were making these claims, but they all kind of revolve around the same basic form of a sighting and so forth. And you go to great lengths in your book to kind of get at the fact that in many of these houses and mansions and abandoned hospitals and all these sorts of things, that multiple people at different times in different places say they saw the same thing. It just adds a little bit of credibility that wouldn't be there if it was one guy
Right.
Who might be a little drunk one night riding home, on his
Right.
horse. And, is that a ghost, or is that the reflection of the moon in the water because he just fell off his horse and he's upside down. So, I appreciate your dedication to taking everything with a grain of salt, but also trying to sift through what has been collected. And as you note, I mean, even the very origins of Staten Island are shrouded in a kind of mystery, through Harry Hudson. I was wondering if you could just tell us just a really quick, give us a sense of kind of why you say that even the beginnings
Right.
have that aura to them.
Well, Henry Hudson was not loved by his crew, and they kind of committed a mutiny, and they threw him and his son, and I think a few others overboard, and they went back, and they were not tried for the crime, even though they knew they weren't admitted to have done it. And no one knows what happened to Henry Hudson. And apparently there was a rock that was found near Canada that had HH and I think the year 1621 on it. And they suspect that might have been a place where he was abandoned, and they might have engraved it into a rock. And that's the only evidence they have. They never found him. And they say that there's a ghost ship that sails through the harbor. And, it's part of the folklore of Staten Island and New York.
I love it. I love it because it just sort of sets the tone for everything else that you write about in this volume. And
Thank you.
It is such a blast. So we have all sorts of cases to look at this week and next week. And I thought what we would do is do what is effectively a charcuterie platter, a smorgasbord of different types, okay? And we'll kind of pick one and talk about it and run to a next one and see what it has to offer. And we'll run the gamut. We're not going to give away everything, but
No.
But there's a few on here that really stand out that are worth kind of talking about. And the first one that I wanted to come to, it in one sense, it falls into your kind of classic haunted house framework. But there's a little more to it than that. The Kreischer House, which you write about, has a long history of kind of decadence and decay and disrepair and sort of wealth gone wrong, And I was just wondering, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you write it is a destination. It is just one of these go-to places. Fascinated.
Well, it always comes up on the places to visit, haunted places to visit, and they do have ghost tours. I've never actually been inside the house, but I've been outside the house. And I can tell you it's behind a shooting range. So it's very interesting that, it just is sitting there vacant. There is a caretaker, though. The Kreischer House was built by a Bavarian German immigrant. His name was Balthasar Kreischer. And he actually built twin houses. So there were two of them up on that hill. Now, Balthasar came to America. He had a stone factory in Germany, and he came to America and established himself in New York City. But then he bought property in Staten Island, and he put a factory up, and he employed many, many people. And two of his sons, I think he had about 6 or 8 children, worked in the factory. And those were the 2 houses that he built for his 2 sons. Now, during this time, business flourished, and he actually named the area Kreischerville, and he put up houses for all his employees, and there are still some. There's a lot of landmarks in Staten Island. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's a problem because you could buy a house and then they'll tell you it's a landmark and you're not allowed to touch it. I've seen that happen as well. But so they named the area Kreischerville, but that didn't last because after World War I, there was a lot of anti-German sentiment, so they called it Charleston. Same thing happened with the Garibaldi Meucci Museum. The Garibaldi House, lost its appeal after World War II because of the Italians. Anyway, not to digress. So the mansions were built for his son, Charles and Edward. But unfortunately, Charles committed suicide. I think it was Charles. No, it was Ed. Edward committed suicide. And they say it was probably because of economic ruin, possibly a fight with his brother, or maybe something to do with his wife, who really quickly got married after that. So who knows? There were a lot of stories circulating. Then the house burned down. So now we were left with just the one house. So they talked about ghosts haunting the mansion and the property as far back then in 1866 after the fire. But more. And that's where a lot of the stories began, a lot of the apparitions, the creepy things that were happening. And after it was abandoned by the Chrysers, it was taken care of by various people. They had caretakers, and they would have all these ghost tours. And it just got creepier and creepier because of the fact, I think, also that it was abandoned and just what it looked like in the inside as well. But it is a popular destination because even Hollywood uses it. They Broadwalk, what was it called? Empire. Yeah. Broadwalk Empire and Paranormal Lockdown was there. And then it really got notoriety in 2005. There was a gruesome crime there.
This was terrible. I mean, it's one of those where it makes you wonder, does the reputation of the mansion precede itself that then leads to something else terrible happening there? Because this was brutal. Tell us what happened.
Okay. Well, I don't delve too much into crimes that are ongoing, let's put it that way. I mean, the criminals are still alive, so I don't like to talk about people.
Right.
But
very fair.
It is very documented that the caretaker, a young man named Joe Black Young, was apparently a hitman for the mob, and he was hired to kill basically another mobster, and his body was really mutilated and buried throughout the property. So once they discovered that, everything got creepier at the Chrysler Mansion. And of course, whoever bought it after that, because it's been bought and sold several times, has taken advantage of that fact. They rent it out. They use it for horror films, independent films, and they still do it. Now it's October. It's Halloween season. They're going to have tours there, and they tell all the creepy stories. And that's what makes it so popular.
So I guess I have a couple questions for you, but the first one is, of course, is this going to be your year to go inside finally at last?
Well, you know what was funny? I was doing an event at Richmond Town, and I was walking around with my book, and somebody stopped me and said, "What is that?" And I told them about my book, and he said to me, "Well, I'm the my uncle's the caretaker, not Joe Black, but
right.
A new caretaker." He said, "And we're going to be doing a tour. Why don't you come?" And we exchanged numbers, and his name was CJ. He was terrific. So I might go and do the tour if I'm not too scared.
I think you have to, Marianna. I think you have to. I think the door is flung wide open for you,
I know. But they were a wonderful family that took over, and, they were having a lot of fun with it. So looking forward to seeing them again.
Absolutely. One of the interesting running threads throughout your book is, like we were saying, sort of documentation and so forth. And in this particular case, Chrysler Mansion has the additional kind of element of people coming there to do testing, to do the electromagnetic stuff and,
right.
The infrared and, all the kind of, they bring the ghost gadgets along and, let's see what we can find and so forth. And it's interesting to me because not everywhere has this, but a good number of the properties in your book you describe as kind of like,
they do.
This is an active field of study and so forth. So have they found anything at all? Anything of note?
I don't really recall, to tell you the truth, what they found. I know that they've had paranormal investigations there, and somebody always hears something. I don't know how they interpret it, but I'm sure they have. I've done those investigations myself, and, I know you could always find something. Even if it's not real.
Exactly. If you go in expecting to find something, I wonder what's going to happen.
Right. I had that experience as well. So,
there you go.
Yeah.
The way I look at this is that if you're making pasta, right, and you got the water to a boil, what do you add? Your pinch of salt. Take your pinch of salt and see what
you
happens.
Can find, what turns out.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, let's switch gears and let's travel a little bit of a ways around the island. And I want to land at a place which I imagine a number of folks out there probably know by name, but they don't actually know what it is, okay? And what I'm referring to is a little place called Snug Harbor. And, there are all sorts of different cultural touchstones, which may reference Snug Harbor, but this is the actual physical site which gave all of those later touchstones their name. And so I was wondering, can you tell us just a little bit about how, what it was and how it came to be, and then how it came to be haunted?
Of course. Well, first of all, it is not little at all. It is tremendous, and it's absolutely beautiful, okay? It's a cultural center, and there are botanical gardens there, and Staten Island Museum. I've actually been to weddings there, and they have art fence shows, so they really are spectacular. They have gardens where they sell fresh fruits and vegetables and plants in the spring. So Snug Harbor was founded in the early 19th century by Captain Robert Richard Randall, okay? And it was supposed to be a retirement home for sailors, and it was a refuge. Many residents struggled with addiction and, at that time leading to suicides and alcoholism. So this captain really wanted to find a place for sailors to live comfortably. So he basically created like a little city in there. There was a church and a hospital, and there was cleaning services and just everything a person needed to grow old there. And at the time, it accommodated about 1,000 seamen, and it became actually one of the first earliest democratic charitable institutions in the United States.
Wow, that's remarkable.
So, with that said, one of my favorite ghost stories is at Snug Harbor. Okay, it's called the Matron's Cottage. Now, it's been told a few ways, and I'll just tell you my interpretation. So this was a 2-family house. Right now it's called Building K at Snug Harbor. It's still standing. And one side was for the matrons, and the other side was the steward and his wife and his family. Now, the matron, she was in charge of all the maids, kind of, and they did the laundry and, all the domestic work that had to be done. And she was very strict. She had strict rules. She enforced a non-fraternization policy for her assistants. She forbade interactions with the sailors, but she broke her own rules. And she had an affair with the sailor. Okay. The affair resulted in a pregnancy, and the matron chose to hide her pregnancy, and she gave birth privately. But it was a very difficult birth, and she got the poor butcher to help her. I guess that was the closest she could find to a doctor. Well, this poor butcher, he delivered the baby, and it was a difficult birth, and it led the butcher to alcohol abuse because it was actually a breech birth, and the baby was born with mental deficiencies, and it was an awful situation. So anyway, the matron hid her son in the basement to keep him a secret. But as he grew, they were concerned about him and maintaining this secrecy. Meanwhile, the poor butcher became such a dead drunk alcoholic that his wife had enough of him, and she kicked him to the curb one day, and he was on his porch and he froze to death. And that was the end of the butcher.
Yeah, there's some beer jackets that can't keep anybody warm, in those conditions.
Right. So that kind of began a vicious cycle of tragedies there. So then the husband, wasn't her husband, the sailor, her boyfriend there, he was so ridden with guilt that he felt that he had to, his name was Herman Ingalls. Right. So he felt that he had to confide in somebody. Now, he was a little scrawny guy, and the matron, she was quite a big woman. Okay. So he decided that he needed to tell someone what was going on with this baby and how he was being raised. So he went to the preacher because he felt that he could confide in him. And he told him, he came up with this story that he attacked the matron and he basically, took her against her will and that she got pregnant and had this child. Well, the preacher was a little suspicious because, I don't know what he looked like, but according to my research, that wouldn't have been physically possible, according to
right.
To what they said. So Henry Ingalls there, Herman Ingalls got very nervous. And one day while this preacher came out of church, he approached him and he shot him to death. And then he turned the gun on himself. So we had a murder-suicide. So in all the craziness and confusion, the whole town came out. They called the ambulance. They called the police. It made the New York Times. It was very sensational. This was a big media story. So the woman, the matron there, she got nervous and she wanted to check on her son. So she ran to the basement to check on him, and she couldn't find him. And he was hiding. But in the interim, he was exposed to the outside world. He saw there was a world out there. And he kind of went berserk. And when his mother finally found him, she stabbed him to death. He stabbed her to death with a scissor. So now she was dead. So now we have the butcher, the preacher, and the sailor, and the matron are all dead. The son gets out into the crowd and nobody knows who he is. And I guess they just view him as, somebody who's insane, who just murdered a woman. And unfortunately, they performed their own justice and they lynched him. So now he was gone. So it was a really brutal affair there. And so needless to say, there's a lot of ghosts that roam that area.
There's a lot of ghosts. And honestly, when I read this account in your book, it was one of those moments where I thought, this can't get any worse. This can't get any worse. And then I turned the page. It's like, nope, it's getting worse. And I thought, well, no, it can't get any worse after that. Nope, it's definitely getting worse, from it's horrible. Hiding a child in a basement to the boy killing his own mother to and then he gets lynched. And then you just that's, I think I just need to go, play outside with some puppies for a little while to kind of rinse all of this off of me.
It's a big hit during the ghost tours, I'll tell you that much.
Oh, I bet it is.
They actually provide death certificates and photos and the newspaper articles from the incident while at the location of the tragedy. So that really did happen. So it's no wonder that the area is creepy.
Yeah, no, it's got something for everybody there. Well, I was wondering actually, as we wrap up this week, would you be so kind? There's a passage in your book which speaks to the Snug Harbor hauntings, and I got to tell you, Marianna, next time I go to New York and I visit Staten Island, it's going to be one of those moments where it's like, I know I'm going to want to visit Snug Harbor, but then I'm going to have to ask myself whether I really want to visit Snug Harbor. You're going to feel a little torn in that situation. But would you read that passage? It's the last paragraph in your Snug Harbor section. the one right in the middle of page 47 there, just so our listeners can kind of get a sense of...
Several staff members, that one?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Would you read that just so we can kind of get a sense of what we're dealing with here?
Sure. Several staff members who work in the main hall C have shared their experiences of paranormal activity inside this historic building. Many have heard footsteps, keys jingling, and doors opening and closing independently. They also see strange reflections, shadows where they shouldn't be, and figures on the balcony when no one else is present. Main Hall C was the first building on the campus where many of these sailors once lived. Some believe spirits have formed a solid connection to the place. Tour guides at the governor's mansion have mentioned that there have been many reports of paranormal occurrences at the house, and that investigators have picked up voices on recordings telling everyone to get out.
The thing that really got me there was the shadows where they shouldn't be. That's pretty creepy, I gotta admit.
Yep.
All right. Well, I know. At least I know I won't be sleeping tonight. You know, it won't be a surprise. At least I'm queued up for some insomnia. So.
Well, go to the botanical gardens there. They're lovely. You'll appreciate those. And the Children's Museum. That's a lot of fun. They have life-size games. You can play checkers and Connect Four. It's great.
Love it, love it, love it. Well, we are going to move from one iconic Staten Island site this week and pick up right back next week with another iconic Staten Island site. Marianna, thank you so much for joining us this week on Crime Capsule. It is a total joy having you with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I love talking about this stuff.
Oh, you're too kind. You're kind. All right, we'll see you next week.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening. Our guest has been Marianna Randazzo, author of Haunted Staten Island, published by the History Press. To order a copy of the book, visit your local independent bookstore or visit arcadiapublishing.com. Join us next week as we continue our conversation with Marianna. See you then. Thanks to our producer, Bill Huffman, our production director, Bridget Coyne, audio engineer, Sean Rule Hoffman, and our executive producers, Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando. I'm your host, Benjamin Morris. Crime Capsule is a production of Evergreen Podcasts and a signature title of the Killer Podcasts Network. You can find Crime Capsule wherever you listen to podcasts. Discover more great true crime and paranormal programming at killerpodcasts.com.